Hello and welcome to the DrivingMaul show. It must be Tuesday at 8 p.m. then. Well, no, actually, it's not. Sorry, folks. We're running a day late today, so it's Wednesday, 8 p.m. This week. But hey, we are still here to talk about rugby stuff, even though the season is over as far as we're concerned, this side of the world. And joining me to go through all of the news, it's Boa. How you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you. Yes, the season is over, so I am showing some degree of withdrawal symptoms, I have to admit. It's very unusual not to look forward to a weekend of rugby, and given that the Barbarians game against Manu Samoa got cancelled, I was a little bit bewildered. But look, it is what it is. No, really well, thank you. I hope everyone is well. I hope everyone is safe. We're in the midst of the Squid Games here in New Zealand. It's red light or green light very shortly. So, everything is good, and looking forward to this Wednesday night special edition.
Thank you. And I've not watched Squid Games yet, so I don't understand all the references. It's one of those I've got to get around to. But good evening to Johan Guam, who's joined us in the live chat, and he goes, "All Blacks to fire Ian Foster? Question. I'm afraid not, Johan. I really don't see that being on the table. They're doing their normal end of year review, and he'll come out of it okay. Having lost 3 games this year, which is or to 3 different countries for the first time. Well, the 4th time in history to 3 different countries, I think it is. But it's not the most losses in a year. But certainly it was a lot of things, and we did talk about that quite a bit last week with Con, and no doubt we'll be sort of talking about the All Blacks on and off for the next couple of months until Super Rugby kicks off. I think the main sort of topics this evening, we'll have a chat about Rugby World Cups and where they're going to be allocated over the next few cycles. The Super Rugby and COVID and kind of what's the situation going on there at the moment. We'll have to talk about Arnie Surveyor, who has gone and re-signed with New Zealand. And then World Rugby has announced 10 variable laws, which is one that we will have a chat about, because I know that's one area that, Bowie, you'll be very knowledgeable about and also interested in. Simon's saying, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Simon. And says, Foster got a 2-year extension at the beginning of the year. Absolutely. Even if they wanted to get rid of him, in all honesty, they couldn't afford to at the moment. They just don't have the cash. Hence why World Rugby has given the next Rugby World Cup to Australia. But we'll get on to that one in a second.
If I can jump in just to respond to Johan as well as Simon, one of the KPIs with the end of year Northern Tour 4, Ian Foster and his coaching group was actually to try out a number of combinations and ensure that the entire squad of players, from a high performance point of view, were given a certain amount of minutes or a game time. So I think he very comfortably met that. And one of the downsides to it was the constant chopping and changing of combinations. And I think we had 4 different captains within a very short period of time as well. So from that point of view, I guess, full marks to Ian Foster and his team. Yes, the results, particularly the last 2 games, didn't go the way particularly the general public or the New Zealand rugby supporters wanted to. But, you can't always have it your way. So you have to look at this from a holistic point of view. And you have to understand these coaching groups and New Zealand Rugby High Performance, these guys, they have a plan and they know what they're doing. So whilst it may not be ideal to drop 3 games in a single calendar season, there are a whole bunch of other things which were very early in the play, clearly set out, and those KPIs were going to be measured. So in that sense, I think Foster and co have achieved a lot. But like I always say, whenever the All Blacks play, there's no such thing as a second string All Black side. They must win by 100 points and play perfect rugby. Until that is achieved, the knives will always be out. And I have to say, with Ian, he's a heck of a nice guy. It just doesn't help the whole scenario because he's the complete opposite of some of the very energetic personalities as All Black coaches we've had, particularly the public choice and All Black coach in waiting, Scott Razor Robertson.
Well, yes, and whether he's All Black choice, All Blacks waiting for the next one, or whether he's one after Joe Schmidt, we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, moving on, the reviewer points out that there were a couple of international this weekend just gone. Yes, as you say, unfortunately, the Barbarians had to pull out of their game against Samoa due to the number of COVID cases they've got. So whilst we did get through the November internationals largely unscathed, I mean, there was the odd player who had to pull out, particularly from England. I'm thinking about Owen Farrell, for example, missed a game, and I think also Joe Marler as well also missed a game because of that. So yes, there have been a number of COVID cases, and unfortunately, yes, the Barbarians got too many. So hence the women's Barbarians game against South Africa became the key match. It was on free to air BBC, which is fantastic, but also got a world record crowd of 27,000. Now, clearly, a number of those were there for the men's game, and it was cancelled, but it still went along. But still, a good turnout for that as well. And great to see the Manu Samoa players turn up, stand for the national anthem, and go round and greet all the crowds. A real shame for them after they pulled out of their full international team that's pulled out of the entire November tour.
Yeah, look, honestly, I felt quite heartbroken for two reasons. One, I missed out on a Barbarians game, and number two, obviously for the Manu Samoan players, because they would have been really looking forward to this, and with COVID, what's the term? This the Rona of 2021. There's nothing anyone can do. Safety comes first. So very, very unfortunate situation. Look, it is what it is. We've got to move on from it. And I see the reviewer was talking about the Chile v Russia game. I actually did manage to catch some of the highlights, being the rugby nerd I am. You have to understand, Chile, a very good side. They've got a very good coach, Pablo Lemon, who's a former Uruguayan player. Now, I know Pablo quite well, having been part of the IRB and World Rugby senior coaches program. And, he's a real tactician, and he's very good at teaching players the basic skills. And yes, there was a good assortment of surprise, more yellow cards. A couple of those yellow cards that was absolutely ridiculous, completely impractical in a contact/collision sport. But unfortunately, those are the rules now. And yeah, right, that's right. I mean, it was a bit of a dampener, but it was a good game. And in the current context, any sort of rugby is better than no rugby. So what can I say?
And talk about, even though it is the end of the season here, Gatland is head coaching along with gone blank as to the ex-Waikato and All Black player, winger, scores tries.
Roger Randall.
Coaching. Pardon? Yeah, Roger Randall, thank you. They're both coaching the New Zealand Barbarians against Heartland Championship side this weekend in Taupo. So if you want to get along to that one, folks, I guess quite a few, more people will be able to with the whole, as you say, traffic light system that comes into effect at the end of this week. So folks, that is available down in Taupo this coming weekend. I must admit, I will not be heading down for that game, though, folks. On that one, yes, Chile are going well, and World Rugby has been putting a chunk of money into it, which is very good to see. On that one, which I think is there. Jan, if you want to know what our thoughts on Razzie, then you need to become a supporter of New Zealand Sport Radio over at patreon.com/NZ Sport Radio. And myself and Con did a 14-minute video talking about the Razzie judgment. So if you want to check that out, that's on New Zealand Sport, nzsportradio.com, our webpage. For that one. So yes, Rugby World Cup then, as I kind of sort of mentioned there about how it's been the next men's Rugby World Cup, so the 2027, has been allocated to Australia. Now, this is a departure from what was originally planned when they did the pairing of Japan and France. There was the idea then that it would alternate between emerging nations and established nations. So hence, after France, it would have gone. The plan was to go to an emerging nation. They've delayed that by a cycle and pushed USA out to 2035. Have I got that right? If I'm doing it off the top of my head here. But I mean, with COVID and the way it's impacted a lot of all of the unions worldwide, though it's not a surprise that it's going to a safe pair of hands for the for the next Rugby World Cup.
Yeah, no question. I think with the uncertainty of the financial model which World Rugby use at the moment, particularly with the Rona-virus. So let's hope this is the last of the Rona and we don't have more alpha, beta, omega versions coming up as the years roll on. And of course, Australia is a large island, and it's a lot easier to manage from a logistical point of view. And of course, an established nation with a good network with the current professional setup when it comes to rugby union. So it's, they've gone for a safety first sort of thing, which is understandable. And of course, last time a World Cup was allocated, which is going to be the 2023 World Cup. Originally, if you recall, South Africa, in fact, was the preferred destination, but surprise, surprise, it ended up going to France. So not entirely sure how and what the inner workings of all this is, but clearly looks like World Rugby. I might not say anything more because I might actually get in trouble with them.
You need to watch your P's and Q's, because being a World Rugby coach educator that you are, whereas myself, I don't have to watch my P's and Q's because I'm nobody as far as World Rugby is concerned. Look, the thing that happened last time around, where South Africa lost out to France, basically came down to a vote, and essentially France offered more money than South Africa, and so hence a bunch of tier 2 nations went, we get our money from World Rugby. World Rugby needs all the money it can get. Therefore, we're going to go for the bigger paycheck. Is essentially how that one went. Now, World Rugby got seriously embarrassed by that, because the World Rugby people had obviously said South Africa was preferred or the best option, and that's basic. And then the vote went against them. This time around, though, what they've done is they haven't made it a public vote in the same kind of way. As Simon says, Australia was the only viable candidate because South Africa pulled out, Argentina pulled out for Australia, and it came down to basically Australia or Russia. And as we've just seen, with Russia losing to Chile, even though Chile had three yellow cards, they are not at the same level as Japan, and there is no way that Russia is in a situation where it can host the Men's Rugby World Cup in 15s. When they hosted the 7th Rugby World Cup a few years back, that was far from being a blinding success either, with empty stadiums from memory. So you're quite right, Simon, that Australia was the only viable candidate. But I think there's also probably been there was a lot of work going on to make sure this was a consensus this time, because of not wanting that the arguing and the disunity that came about from last time about.
Yeah, and safety first, and hopefully everyone's towing the same line. And a very good point from Simon there, that they've got a lot of experience, particularly managing the logistics, managing all the teams, and they've obviously got an existing really good infrastructure for these sort of competitions. And of course, it's from, as I said, managing the logistics is going to be one of these key issues in any sort of world competition going forward, particularly with the new normal. I think they've got this one pretty much bang on. And of course, for us Kiwis who live here, it's only a 3-hour flight. If we can manage to score some tickets, then you're off to the races.
And then after that, say the USA is the expansion one. Now the USA, which will be 10 years away now, when they get theirs. Is that right? 10 years? No,
11.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's no. I beg your pardon. It'll be 12 years.
12 years. No, that cannot be right. It has to be 10 years because it's 3031. Yes, 2031. So yes, it is
2031.
10 years time. So look, 10 more years of Major League Rugby should grow the audience in the States, plus also make them more competitive. So look, I think that's a good time there. The reviewer says one big question though: do they expand it now? Do they expand it in time for Australia? Absolutely not. And the reason being is cost. Is that look, they clearly the Australia bid has been put in there to raise as much money as possible for World Rugby and also for Australia to get Australia out of its monetary issues, and that way you end up with a with. So I had to say I don't think they'll expand it. Will they expand it for the USA? Possibly, but I think Australia will come too soon from a financial point of view for World Rugby. Bo, you on the same page there, or do you disagree?
Yeah, look, there's two sides to the coin. I mean, when I put my coach educator hat on, I want the game to expand as much as the game can, because if any sport is to stay alive and grow, we need new punters. So to do that, we need a very competitive landscape. But the reality is, under the current landscape, unless you're in the top tier one, there's 8 nations. What I am starting to see is the gap widen bigger and bigger. So in order to make it more competitive, then you will, from a World Rugby administrative point of view, you're going to have to put some interventionist policies purely for on-field competitiveness. So one of these things is, of course, with the new eligibility switch, which is going to benefit the Pacific Island nations. So yeah, we're sort of going in the right direction, but for on-field competitiveness, I think we need far more stringent and far more radical interventionist ideas. But the reality is the tier 1 nations will never agree to it. And I'm talking about handicapping systems where when tier 1 nations play tier 2, where you have a certain amount of rating points given per player, and they limit the amount of top choice players. But again, that's, those are, as I said, very radical interventions. But from a financial point of view, you're absolutely right, Paul. Bang on the money there. They don't want that sort of thing because it's just going to sort of upset the equilibrium or the apple cart. And they just want to be able to put as much financial stability into this bid going forward.
Yep. A couple of good points by Simon is that they need to expand it to get Canada back from a TV point of view. Racing, which obviously is a big TV nation from that point, and also perhaps that the USA one needs to move into the June-July window to avoid the things like NFL, Major League Baseball, basketball, etc. Well, we'll have to wait and see about that. But I don't think they'll be looking at doing that.
Yeah, Paul, the easiest way, in fact, sorry to interrupt, the easiest way to expand this whole thing is to have two different, you have the world, the main Rugby World Cup, and then you have another tier 2 cup for the nations which get knocked out earlier, running concurrently.
Yeah, well, I think that the 3 teams that don't make it into the knockout stages and the group stages should have their own knockout cup for the world, rather than World Cup for the World Plate and the World Bowl for those. And so I think at the same time.
What I'm actually talking about is like the easiest way to expand this thing or expand the game is to get China involved. Because you got to understand, when it comes to Asian rugby, there's 28 unions. That's right, 28 unions, but they only get 2 seats or votes when it comes to as far as the council goes. So you need a little bit of lateral thinking here, and you have to look at how to engage these nations, because the reality is these nations, particularly in Asia rugby, they get a massive TV audience. If you engage and switch on China into this, it's going to be a game changer. Then you really don't need anyone or anything else, because the TV revenue from that model itself is just going to absolutely open the floodgates when it comes to finances. So needs to have a little bit of lateral thinking. That's just my take on it. But we'll see how things transpire.
The other big news was that England will be hosting the Women's Rugby World Cup in 2025. We'll look at off the back of how well their 15s women's competition, the Premier 15s, is going, how well they performed in this window. You've got to say that's just following up on good work that's been happening there in growing the women's game. Still a lot of work to go, folks. Don't get me wrong, but they're definitely one of the leading nations in women's rugby currently. And at the moment, they were hoping to announce who was going to have the 2029 Rugby World Cup, which is the women's one again. But so far, they've not been able to do that. And you expect COVID would be a big part of that one as well on that one. So we'll take a quick interlude now to run through a couple of Johan's questions in here as to some of these things. Maybe the box should have Eddie Jones to coach as the back line. Wow. That would be an interesting one. I can't see Eddie Jones being an assistant coach ever again. His ego is too big for that one. As Bowen shakes his head for those who are on the podcast. Who's better coach, Eddie Jones or Steve Hansen? Well, very different style of coaches, both very good coaches, and both achieved a lot. So I think it's difficult to say either. I don't think you can really say that, because always one of the hardest things with coaches, Bowen, is always that they always have different cattle, right? It's not like you never see the same coach with the same players or the same preparation. So it's very difficult to compare coaches like that, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And, and different coaches, they have a certain bias towards a certain style of rugby because, for them, it's about what works best for them and identifying that. And some coaches are very good at embracing innovation. They try new things. Steve Hansen was one of them. And, of course, Eddie Jones, in his own way, tinkers with innovation, be it both on or off the field. I think it's more off the field. He loves pre-game press conferences, never short of a dull moment. But I think with the way the game is actually evolving, and the game has evolved, particularly in the last 3 to 4 weeks, we're seeing the collision really play a large role. And ironically, when World Rugby are actually trying to speed up the game, we actually see the game slowed down in ways which I never thought I would see in the year 2021. So there will be some changes coming up in 2022. That's right, you heard it here first. We are seeing it at the community level. The next, I would say it's a complete reset, because professional and elite level coaches, they actually don't want to give up some of these rules, because they see it as a real advantage for them. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Yeah, it's interesting. It really depends on what point of view, what philosophy you as a coach want to employ. And you're right, the cattle, or the type of players, and the type of players will largely dictate what style of rugby you're going to play. And I think that's been very much the case with looking at, for example, either the Springboks the All Blacks. The All Blacks have a very different type of player group, and they play a different style of rugby because that's what suits them. But if you look at the Springboks, very, very different cattle, and they play a brand which clearly suits them, albeit not for the liking of the majority.
Yep. Why didn't Scott Robinson become the All Blacks head coach? Well, basically because they went for the New Zealand went for continuity and a man who they basically promised the job a couple of years before to already. So hence there was continuity rather than revolution between just like they had done already with Steve Hansen, and they say it worked with Steve Hansen, so why wouldn't it work with Ian Foster? Was the theory there? Maybe we should fire Jackson Nabar as our head coach, replaced with Johan Ackerman. No, again, I think Jackson Nabar is doing a good job. Just needs perhaps Razzie to get himself out of the limelight a little bit and let Jax actually run the show. But you got to say, I think with the COVID fight that he's had this year, I think he's done a good job on that one as well. So, but let's jump on then to the to the other topics we're going to talk about then. I think what you're talking about there then is probably time for us to talk about the 10 variable laws that World Rugby has brought in. I will just quickly run through what those 10 are, and then you can explain perhaps some of the thinking behind it on this one. But very quickly, at the community level, you'll be allowed to basically play with anywhere between 10 and 15 players, and have kickoff as long as it's agreed before kickoff, and you'll play 15-a-side rules. So the rules will stay the same. It's not like having a sevens version of the game or anything like that. It's still the same version. Games can be as short as 40 minutes rather than having to be the full 80 now as well. The teams will be able to use rolling subs, and also have an option where every player has to play at least half of the game, which I think is a great idea at the community level, rather than people sat on the bench and coming on for the last 5 minutes. Scrums can be reduced in size, so hence if you've got 10 players, you have 5 in the scrum rather than 7, and they also can be uncontested. Lineouts, you can agree not being allowed to jump or not being able to lift, again for safety reasons there. Kicking, you can also have a rule where you're not allowed to kick penalties out for a line out in the opposition half. Pitch size can be adapted as well depending on surface condition, but I think that's probably one of the lesser ones we will see. Ball size, you'll have to play with a smaller ball. We've talked about that previously on this show for the women's game, for example, because physically they have smaller hands. But this will be community-based, not professional at the top level. Weight-based banding allowed, and also tackle height, which will be one of your ones there, Boa, where the tackle height can be either at the shoulders, at the nipples, or at the waist. On this one now, 10 rules there, Boa. What's World Rugby's thinking behind these rules as a kind of philosophy?
Yeah, the philosophy is simple: to encourage more new participants and new entrants into the game, where they're trying to simplify the game and make it easier access-wise for community participants. And these are, most of these things have been discussed at game development level, where I've been involved for probably the last 4 years. And it's really nice to see that, a sport such as rugby union, which is, not the fastest to adapt to innovation or embrace change. Look at these innovations. Now, the interesting thing for me, though, is that it's, from a New Zealand rugby point of view, it's been left as optional. So it really comes down to the PU or provincial union and the respective competition. So say, for example, if it comes down to the Auckland Gala Premier Shield, it's up to Auckland Rugby to talk to the club delegates. It's called the COD, or the chair of delegates. And then if there's a majority vote saying, look, this is what we're going to do. For example, as you know, it's My Little Baby Safe Tackle Framework. Everyone comes up with a law saying, all right, no tackles above the sternum line. And they put my safe tackle line, or STL, across their playing shirts. Great. But that's not to say that another union, say, for example, North Harbour, they don't have to change anything. So these are purely optional. There are some very good science and research behind it, particularly with making the playing field smaller. One really good example is one of the fastest spreading sports or growing sports in the world, which is 3x3 half-court basketball. Research clearly shows, the empirical evidence shows that most participants like the smaller field size, and it's easy to play, it's easy access, low cost. So that's the line of thinking behind it. And also, you have to understand, sometimes for community games, it's very difficult to find a full 15 or full subs bench. So again, this now opens the door for a little bit of flexibility and a bit of common sense to prevail. So I think this should have been done a long time ago. And also, this is the perfect tonic for some of the dropping or ailing numbers at different, particularly lower age grades with rugby union. Because for the last 3 years, what's actually been keeping the game afloat, and the numbers back what I'm saying, is the women's game. There's been a growth year on year, on average about 29 to 30%, whereas in certain age brackets in men's or boys rugby union, we've had a significant decline of players, and they're mostly gone to either play football or 3x3 basketball. So I think great changes, be interesting to see. And I should have some news about a few competitions with a couple, maybe more provincial unions wanting to trial out my safe tackle line. What that means is no tackling above the sternum.
Now, I mean, some of these rules, I think you would need to be done at a competition level, such as kicking out, penalties for lineouts and things like that. But other ones, I can see, like team numbers, could be ones that are game specific rather than for the whole competition. But I from where I am, I'm in Waihi, here in the Waikato, or in the Thames Valley as a provincial union, but in Waikato from a kind of area. Now we could get 2 men's teams together as a club, but we couldn't get a women's team out there. So if for example, the women's competition became a 10s competition rather than 15s, then obviously that would make it much more accessible and much easier on that one. So yeah, look, overall, I like these. I guess it's going to be a matter of seeing how many of these are actually used on a full competition basis and how many used as a game by game basis. Also, which could lead to some levels of confusion. To be honest with you, if it becomes a game by game one rather than a competition one there as well. My other feeling here is that actually what they're doing here really is pulling together some things that that several unions have been doing anyway, and just saying yes, it's okay for you to do them to a certain degree. Because as you say, some of these things, New Zealand Rugby had already announced for next season for the community game, and World Rugby says yes. Most of the feedback, or most of the feeding into this, had come from England, Wales, and New Zealand. So it sounds like similar thing, or some of these ideas have already probably been tried out at some various community levels in those countries. Also, I mean, look, we've seen in France pre-COVID was supposed to be dropping the tackle line to the waist for all of their community games, for example. Now, I don't know how that went because obviously COVID came interrupted, so I don't know how well that worked. But so there are a number of, to me, there's a mixture here of good initiatives and of just pulling initiatives together so they're in one place so everyone knows about them more than anything else, really.
Yeah, Paul, I can tell you exactly how that French trial went. It went very well because I was actually involved in some of the consultation there. So one thing I have to say is the community game, particularly the younger players, always look at what's happening in the elite game. And it's not funny the amount of times I've seen players and coaches ask me in some of my coach developer workshops saying, why are the Super Rugby guys doing this? And you're telling us this is what you recommend or this is what you want to do. So one of the disappointing things, I guess, is that after all these years, I would have loved to have seen a tackle height regulation in the senior to elite level in a more explicit manner, because we've been going on and on about this. Most of the injuries, concussion related, and most of the cards, come from direct shoulder contact to chin, jaw, head, and back of the neck. So this is one area the game still hasn't evolved with. So I would have loved to have seen that being explicitly regulated. But one of the reasons why it isn't happening is because majority of the elite level coaches will not agree to it. So I have to state that as well, because the very idea, most of their defenses are based in and around going chest on chest, dip late, and the ability to wrap the arms. So there are various techniques to get around it, but this is something which is, I have to say, a bit disappointing, and I would have loved to have seen this regulated at the professional level.
Yeah, that's it. Look, when kids come to play and turn to train, they're going to copy what they see on TV, right? And that's what a lot of people, because you copy the guys who are the best to try and be the best. And so if they're not having to lower their tackle heights, why should I? So yeah, I agree. Absolutely, it's got to be done at the shop window as well on that one. But I have said for a few years now that I thought we would end up with 2 sets of laws, one for the professional players and one for amateur players, because the amateur body just can't handle what the professional players do.
This is something I fundamentally completely disagree, because what this means is the game is, or the professional authorities are trying to cater for less than 0.5% of the all population of rugby players, both men and women, which is the professional elite level. And basically, you're telling the other 99.5% that, oh, look, we'll play the game differently. To me, this is a fundamental flaw. It's trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to change what I would call Darwin's evolution of rugby. All of a sudden, you're trying to alter the DNA when it gets to the elite level. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately, because that's just how the human brain is wired. There's enough empirical evidence to show this. And if you look at most other sports, almost all other sports in the world, it's refereed and officiated under the same set of rules for some strange reason. Rugby, being a collision and contact sport, want to be different, and it's a very, very dangerous area which the game is walking on thin ice, particularly with all these head injuries and concussions. I'm a very passionate opponent, very vocal against this. I think both the community, that is the amateur and the professional game, needs to be policed in the same way, so that we teach our kids and coach our kids the good habits so that they can then clearly take it to the elite level. Full stop. Period.
Well, I understand where you're coming from. I just say that it appears that's not the direction we're going in at the moment, that course will have to be changed if to happen. So this kind of thing, these 10 variable laws are heading into a divergence of the laws, and we do have a kind of, in some ways, different levels as you grow up, because obviously we now have, whilst when you and I were coming through, we probably started with contact rugby when we were 5 or 6 or whenever we first started playing, whereas nowadays obviously you go through touch and ripper and things before you actually start having actual contact rugby. So we already do have kind of age grade different laws for the game. It's just a question now as can we keep the adult part of the game together, or will it diverge in the same way, I guess, like NFL and American football has done. Let's be honest, there is no way a non-professional can play under NFL rules. You will just die. You'll get ripped. You'll just get broken. So that's, yeah. It's just we'll see where that all lands. But yeah, on the whole, good ideas, and it's for those ones. Johan, I'm not going to let Boa in on to refereeing in this show, because we'll keep out of that rabbit hole this week.
I promise I'll be gentle. And I have to say, even though I'm quite vociferous in the criticism, by and large, it is factual. So what can I say?
I'll just like to remind everybody, without a referee, there is no game, folks. We need them. They are the most important people on the pitch, because without them, there is no game. Moving on, though. So, Arnie Surveyor has re-signed for New Zealand Rugby for 4 years, 2 with the Hurricanes, and 4 with New Zealand Rugby. So, I mean, there were lots of rumours going around that he would be playing, that he would be turning out for Moana Pacifica, but that's not to be, Bo.
No, not at all. And look, I think it was pretty set in concrete that he's a firm Hurricanes man, and the Hurricanes were going to, they've got an enormous amount of respect for each other. Basically, the Hurricanes, Wellington Rugby, and Arnie Surveyor, and it makes perfect sense for him to stay in a franchise which is, competitive, to be, as a springboard to the level of rugby he aspires to play, which is All Blacks or Test level. So I think, sort of trying to go on to Moana Pacifica, it's pioneering year is probably a risk as well, because for argument's sake, if they don't be as competitive as they want to be, and if they are given the old Spanish Archer early in play and get knocked out of proceedings, it just leaves a hole as far as playing competitive rugby to get the required minutes. So I think it's a great move. Interestingly, 2 years with the Hurricanes leading up to the 2023 World Cup, and 4 years with NZR. So that might leave a little bit of wiggle room for him to probably move sideways. But I suspect what will happen is, after the World Cup, he will probably take his sabbatical and head off to Japan, make a little bit of extra money.
He's got a 6 month sabbatical in for 2024. Hence, so he'll skip Super Rugby in 2024 is kind of the plan, and then decide where he comes back in 2025. Because, I mean, at the moment, I mean, one of the questions Johan asked, where's Julian Severe? Well, Julian Severe currently lives in Auckland but plays for the Hurricanes still, which is a hell of a commute. So I guess it depends on where Ardy settles down when he comes back from Japan, and which Rugby franchises are willing to take him as well. I think from that point of view.
Well, Julian Severe is called the bus. I think commuting is not an issue, but I get your point. It is interesting that is.
Oh, Bo was frozen on me there, unfortunately. Simon says, I don't think he's going to stand down 3 years while he's playing for New Zealand to play for Samoa. No, you're quite right. I don't think he will do either, but he could have played for Moana Pacifica and still played for the All Blacks. New Zealand Rugby have previously been open to that happening. So because they said that the number of All Blacks players could play for Moana Pacifica. So just because he would someone might sign for Moana Pacifica does not necessarily rule them out of playing for the All Blacks. So so from that point of view, I think it is that he could have played YMCA and stayed with the All Blacks. Johan, why isn't Julian Severe playing for the All Blacks anymore? Because he's not good enough. There are better wingers around. Put simply, very simple on that one. Now, I guess the other thing about actually the Ardy Surveyor one, before we actually move on to talk about Super Rugby and what might happen there, is he's actually negotiated this contract himself. He has not used a player agent, which I think is very Ardy in that kind of sense. Look, he set up his own businesses around. Well, he tried to have. So he did have his own podcast for a while, which he kind of stopped doing. He's had his own clothing brand, but he's a great believer in players managing their own business and setting themselves up for life. So clearly getting involved in contract negotiations is a good business skill for him going forwards. Plus, also he's also a great believer also of basically the Pacifica players and Maori players and having self-control rather than having, say, white Pakeha, I'm probably pronounced that wrong, sorry folks, agents doing it all for them. Look, good move for him. Has it taken a bit longer? Absolutely. Do I think all players will go down the route of negotiating their own contracts? No, I don't. It does take time and effort, and to be as good as you can be at something, sometimes you need to have all your focus on that and can't afford to. Whereas I think Ardy is probably at a level where he always has to be doing something. And when he's not exercising his body, he needs to be exercising his mind. And I think these negotiations would have been very good for that for him.
Yeah, no question. I think, and this might be a sign of things to come, particularly with the top echelon of the very elite players. They want to probably get more engaged and more hands-on with the business side of things. And you're right, Paul. This is a sign of a very mature professional, and this is a sign of where Ardy is at, as far as where he's at. Life as well as his professional career, where he's actually comfortable doing the talking and negotiating, and his very successful career, I think, awaits for him post rugby to do with professional players and their matters going forward. And also, I think he'll play a huge role. I'm just going to give you a little snippet on player safety going forward, particularly with World Rugby and how professional players are taught and how some of these collisions are managed both on and off the field. So I think it's great to see, and he's a very likable guy, very lovable. He's always on TikTok, and you gotta love the guy's energy, and all strength and power to a Severe.
And let's hope he, whilst he's doing player safety, that he promotes the use of gum shields.
I'm sure he would duly note that.
I think
something I've spoken to for a number of occasions.
His wife reminded him quite clearly on that one. So yes, no, absolutely. It's yes. She's like, yeah, darling, I want you coming home with all your teeth intact, please. Wear your gum shield. Absolutely. So yes, Super Rugby then. Next year we had a schedule and everything. We had a super round in Melbourne and all these kind of things, and then the New Zealand government came out with their new travel guidelines, and that's basically so. Hence, we are moving to traffic lights, as I think we've mentioned already at the end of this week. By the way, this is no judgment as to whether it's right or wrong. This just is what it is. And then international travel next year opens up so that New Zealand permanent residents and New Zealand nationals can travel into the country and self-isolate at home for 7 days if they have had fully vaccinated, and that opens up for international for non-Kiwis from sometime in April from memory. Now, the problem with self-isolating for 7 days is that doesn't give you any time to play another rugby game, does it? Unless you play Friday night and then play the following Sunday and have long weeks. But it's throws the entire schedule out the window, Bo.
It does. But I've got a strong feeling here that NZR with SANZAR will intervene on this matter, and they'll put a special case forward where they will have some, fairly straightforward, simple but stringent, systems and processes in place, and this would include rapid tests, or what they call RAT tests, where you can swab your saliva. So I think they will move to some sort of model there for the sake of saving this competition and the logistics, because trying to redo a schedule to bring forward the New Zealand games is just going to be an absolute nightmare. And of course, the broadcasters won't like this because they would have had this all figured out. So I'm fairly sure that there will be some sort of intervention when it comes to professional sport teams, particularly involving rugby union in this country and how it's dealt to across the Tasman. So fingers crossed we have a practical solution, because I know this whole red light, green light, or traffic lights, whatever you call it, sounds simple. But then when I actually started reading it, I did realize that it's a tad more complicated than just going red says stop and green says go. So, without sounding or trying to get into the politics of this, I'm sure there'll be some kind of compromise coming in, particularly with high economic value sporting events and sporting teams. And of course, for the sanity of the nation, I don't think the government is going to risk trying to push the whole Super Rugby sideways, particularly given that we have the Fiji Drua and Moana Pacifica in the Pioneer season. So fingers crossed, Mr. Paul Baines.
Absolutely. Look, I think there's going to be.
At Bathurst, you're either first or
don't know what happened there with the video started playing by accident. But yes, as you say, I think the rugby authorities will canvass the New Zealand government to try and get an exemption, and they will put all these things in place and say, yes, look, they'll travel like this, or blah, 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 blah. The New Zealand government so far has said no exemptions, but we'll have to wait and see how that one pans out. But if they do have some sort of bubble, I don't see why they can't do that. Just to comment on Simon, the traffic light system is nonsense. Levels makes more sense. Look, whether you say it's levels, whether you say it's traffic lights, whether you say it's whatever's, at the end of the day, it's not what you call it. It's basically what controls you put in place at the different levels. And the only difference between traffic lights and levels is a number rather than the colour. Right? It makes no difference, particularly on that one there. I'll turn around to a positive test within teams despite vaccinations could destroy the comp. Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that in rugby with 14 players from Munster who have travelled to South Africa. I think I'm to say that 9 of whom have got COVID. I don't know why it's 14 or what's exactly going on there. To be honest with you, I'm running off. Look, just because we've got vaccinated doesn't remove COVID from being an issue, folks. It is still going to be an issue for the foreseeable future into next year. And as Nocturnal Right says, yeah, the breakers in basketball. Now, I don't follow basketball very closely, but it looks like essentially their entire team got wiped out, i.e., when I say wiped out, I mean came down with COVID. None of them having to be hospitalized or anything. But yeah, so yeah, look, it is. We are going to be rolling the dice on a regular basis for the next 6 or whatever months it is. So it's going to be a bit of a problem there. on that one.
Well, I have to agree with Simon. Just going to that previous comment, this traffic light system, just purely from a community rugby basis. I mean, I was spending a good chunk of time last evening trying to figure out how is it best we're going to manage trainings at my rugby club on how we can do this safely so that we don't put people at risk. And it is a challenge, particularly with the community game, with the numbers who are allowed to assemble, and again, all it takes is one infection, and in a big group of people, regardless whether they're vaccinated or not, there's every chance it could spread. And then next thing you know, it becomes what's the term is? A cluster, a beautiful statistical word, but not such a good word when it happens in the whole Rona sense. So it is quite challenging, particularly for community or grassroots level rugby clubs and also schools, and it will have an impact on how people prepare, train, particularly in the preseason. Now, if you look at the professional teams, no problems whatsoever, because they can manage their biological bubbles, they have resources to throw at it. And I have to say, based on what we're seeing, preseason is in full swing, and I'm expecting the New Zealand franchises to come out absolutely swinging, because looking at some of the speed tests, the endurance tests, boy, there's some serious athletes out there and some serious men on serious wheels, looking at some of the speed testing which guys like Rico Ioane have been doing.
Well, Rico Ioane shouldn't be doing anything, because he should be on his stand down from being from All Blacks. But anyway, I mean, I had an interview. I was involved in a Zoom conference interview with Clayton McMillan when they announced the Super Rugby squads, and he was basically saying that his one of his jobs will be to tell the All Blacks players to stay away, actually have a rest, both mentally and physically. So to hear that Rico is doing speed work at this stage is nuts to me. Isn't he actually he should still be in quarantine?
Well, it's a case of
he should still be in quarantine. He shouldn't even be out yet. If he was on the November tour.
Well, it's a very no. I think their quarantine period is well and truly gone.
Well, no, because they only played. It was only 2 weekends, only a week and a half ago since they played France. It's not even been 2 weeks.
Oh, it's interesting. Some of the reports you can look up yourself. What it's been doing. Average speeds have been talked about from GPS data. So, yeah. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is the way professional athletes are evolving, with particularly the quantum and the volume of physical work they do. It's kind of like RoboCop. Crime never stops, and you have to be got to be on the ball, quite literally. And there's a large emphasis on volume of training. And Johan, what happened to the Caleb Clark guy? He is in amazing shape. He is working really hard, and I think he will be one of the standout players for this season, Super Rugby coming up. Unfortunately, he missed out on the Olympics, and I think that's kind of really set the fire in his belly again. And all reports coming to the Blues camp is that he is in absolute phenomenal shape, great athlete, and I think it's only a matter of time before he makes himself back into the All Black test fold.
I'll be saying quarantine is only 10 days if double vaxxed. Not sure that's true for New Zealand. Don't know which country that because but anyway, I don't know.
It's 10 days now. It's 10 days.
Is it 10 days now? Okay.
Yep.
There we go. I'm out of touch. Sorry, folks. Okay, so if it is 10 days, and yet he could be just out of quarantine, maybe just from that one. So folks, so we'll just have to wait and see on the Super Rugby one. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? If they'd gone down my route, which was to have 2 conferences, and then they would be having all the derbies at the beginning of the season, and it wouldn't be such a big issue. We'll see what happens on that one. As you said, the most likely option is that they will get themselves an exemption, but the less likely one is that they end up doing some sort of conference-based thing. That have what they have said is they really do not want to do Super Rugby Aotearoa again. That was that's something that they will not do. They were asked, would all the teams relocate to Australia? And whilst that wasn't something they were working on, they also said, well, that is an option. So that is one possibility. Who knows? I mean, that's obviously what has happened for the Warriors, the Breakers, and the Phoenix. They've all relocated to Australia. So yes, we'll see what how it all pans out in that one. Super Rugby A is not financially viable long term. You're quite right. And so at the end of the day, no one wants conferences in New Zealand. Well, maybe so, or maybe when you don't get to see home and away derbies, maybe fans will get upset about that instead. Because I must admit, as a season ticket holder, which I used to be at, or a member of the Blues, I would get upset that I wouldn't see some of the New Zealand teams there because there wasn't home and away games. So anyway, so we'll see on all of that one as to how it all pans out. But it is very much in the air. What I think we can say though is that Super Rugby will happen next year, or they will move heaven and high water to make it happen, and they will move heaven and high water to make sure that it is also Super Rugby Pacific, not Super Rugby Aotearoa and Super Rugby AU as well. I think it's pretty clear that that's what they're trying to do. Well, Tony Rice reckons there might be a player rebellion if Super Rugby moved to Australia. Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think it would end up being one of these non-compulsory things that players who didn't want to go wouldn't have to, etc., which we've seen other sports do. But on that one, but apparently back in Super Rugby 12 made derbies more scarce, which on that one. But to me, if I'm a Chiefs or a Blues member and I've got my season ticket, I want to see all four other New Zealand Super Rugby franchises play my team at home on that one. But there you go.
No question. And look, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, beg your pardon there, don't discount anything, because if Rona and what's this new variation they call us, alpha, beta, omega, whatever it is, has a exponential growth, and if things really turn to custard, then it might be a case of having to restructure everything and then have a go with Super Rugby Aotearoa. Of course, that's a very extreme case. So let's not discount any options, because we're still quite early in this supposed new variant of the outbreak, and it could have further ramifications. We're starting to see that happening in South Africa, unfortunately, because what's transpired over the last week or so. And again, it does have its upside. I mean, we saw some fantastic games with the local derbies, and you're right, Paul. Sometimes I'd much rather watch watchable rugby than watch games which aren't as watchable, because as a fan, that's what you want. You want to see fast, up-tempo, high-speed, skilled games where you're scoring lots of tries, big hits, skill and tactical rugby. So that is something Super Rugby Aotearoa really put everyone on notice. So again, what I'm trying to say is, if there is a significant outbreak and if it just completely throws everything out of the window, NZR might not have an option. So let's wait and see. That is not the case, and let's just look forward to Super Rugby.
Yeah, Simon points out that Scarlets and Cardiff aren't allowed to be based in Wales. They haven't currently based themselves in Belfast since their trip to South Africa. So look, it isn't just us over here in New Zealand that have had these issues, and there are other issues elsewhere as well. So there we go. That's what that one is. Nocturnal Rights, I'm not going to get into the politics of whether countries are being punished or not punished due to reporting of corona, etc. I personally don't follow it all close enough for that. And also that's not where we are in this show. But it is. Look, it's a real shame that the URC in particular, which I have been, to me, that's the competition I'm the most excited about post-COVID or COVID-induced. I think the URC is the only competition that's really changed significantly due to COVID, in the fact that if you look at Super Rugby Pacific, it's still the same length as Super Rugby used to be. It's the format, whilst it's all the games aren't in the middle of the night, like they used to be. On the whole, it's pretty much the same thing as Super Rugby used to be. Whereas with URC, at least they have reduced the number of games they're playing. So the season is actually shorter than it used to be, and they're not going into international windows. I say it's to me, it's the only competition that's really changed and used this opportunity to reset slightly. And they've also brought in Rock Nation, and actually looking outside of rugby as to how you market the game as well. So to me, I think that for me, I think URC is it's a real shame what's happening to it, but to me, it's the most exciting rugby competition at the moment in the world, and with most potential. There we go.
Probably with most potential, but let's see how much potential that actually realizes from a point of view of quality of rugby. But again, you have to try different things, and you're on the money there, Paul, because if you keep doing the same thing, you get the same outcome. And what I think URC have done is just tinkered with that notion and just changed things a little bit. And you're right, short season, short number of games. Whereas if you look at Super Rugby, it's more or less the same product, just slightly packaged a little bit differently, with a different number or different edition, which is obviously 2022. And then of course, for me, the real plus is that Fiji and Drua, the ability they've been given to prepare for that length of time, I think that's going to have a significant effect. And they may not necessarily keep up all the way with particularly the New Zealand franchises, but I think they'll be fairly competitive, much more than Moana Pacifica, purely because they've been given time together, preparation together. They had their squad all sorted out well in advance. So for me, that's a real highlight. And if that spark really ignites it, I think this Super Rugby competition, from an entertainment point of view, is going to be phenomenal.
And I do think one of the things that has been learned from previous Super Rugbies is that, so if you look at how Moana Pacifica and as you say, Fiji and Drua have put themselves together, it's much more similar to how the Jaguares put themselves together than how the Sunwolves did, for example. I think there's a lot of lessons there as to how you do and how you do not start a franchise, because whilst we love the Sunwolves and we love their fans in particular, I mean, they're the best fans in the competition. They essentially were a brand new team pretty much every single year they existed. I think perhaps 2 years where there was some continuity. Every other year was pretty much an entirely brand new squad with new coaches and everything. So it was it showed us that wasn't how to the administration for Sunwolves was non-existent essentially.
And also, Paul, look, when you pick a name for a franchise, you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't get burnt with a name like Sunwolves. I mean, Sunwolves don't exist. So to me, how ironic is irony? They just burnt themselves out. Excuse the pun. But yeah, look, I get what you're saying, and it's a very, very valid point. But let's see how this whole Fiji and Drua goes. And I think their style of attacking rugby will do the talking, and that will bring the punters to get eyeballs, particularly from the Asian audience I'm talking about, because that's the sort of rugby they really want to. And that try Fiji scored against Wales, that's a sign of things to come, because that's what we want, where you take your fair catch and you're not waiting for the world to go past you. You just force the play, quick tap, boom, straight through the middle, breaks a tackle, inside pass, reverse pass. Next thing you know, even before you could go catch your breath, right time. So let's look forward to that.
That sounds good. The sun represents Japan, which it does, obviously, and apparently the Wolves was the only name hadn't been trademarked in Japanese sport. So there we go. That's how they.
It reminded me of a horror movie. How it has a show me a villain, and I'll write you a tragic end sort of thing. So they were brave. They were brave for the little time being. And if you recall that victory against the Blues, I never thought that day would come. I was feeling very, very miserable that day. But hey, all power to them. But unfortunately, for one of the franchises, which was arguably one of the most resourced as far as finances go, they're like magnesium. One day they were bright, next thing you know, whoosh, gone up in flames.
So anyway, thank you very much, Boa, for being on the show. I've had a few issues, folks, with the with Acast, so it might take a while for the podcast to get up. But yeah, we'll be back hopefully on Tuesday at 8 p.m. next week. If not, it'll be a Wednesday, depending on what schedules we can do. And as Boa's pointed out, he finds that that Wednesday is actually might be an easier night for us to do, as it doesn't clash with rugby training, etc. But we are out of season, so hopefully Tuesdays will be a bit quieter anyway for folks. So thank you very much, Boa.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me, and everyone else. Stay safe. Enjoy the Squid Game or the traffic lights, particularly if you're in Auckland. If it says red, you know what it means. Stay put, stop, look around yourself, and as soon as it turns green, whoosh, fly away.
Basically, go online and read it. It's not that difficult. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to
You'd be surprised, Paul. You'd be surprised. It did my head in last night.
All right. Stay safe, folks, and have a good week.